another cage match. So we'll do round two. You ready to go?
All right, round two. All right, so let's do another cage match. Hopefully this one is at least a little bit more challenging on my end because that prediction was so simple.
Well, I think this will be interesting because this one I think he talks more. But they're talking about the guy is asking, should I pay off my mortgage or invest money? So it's a similar kind of scenario, but Dave's justification, he feels more of a need to justify it in this one. So that might.
So we maybe get a little bit more out of Dave in this one, maybe more detail
on why his strategy is this way. Yeah. Oh, shoot.
Hey, John, welcome to the Dave Ramsey Show.
Hey, thanks for taking the call.
Sure, what's up?
I got a question. I have been able to save up quite a bit, a decent stash of savings, and the only debt I have is a mortgage. I've always been an avid investor, and I was lucky enough to get locked in at a low rate, 3.25%. So just curious your thoughts. Having a difficult time convincing myself to pay off my mortgage with such a low rate.
How much do you owe on your mortgage?
About $180.
Okay. And how much is the non-retirement nest egg?
About $90.
Okay. And so you don't have enough to pay it off?
Correct. So I've been trying to decide, does it make sense to just throw that chunk at that?
Okay, I got you. Okay. Even though it doesn't pay it off. Okay. And what's the home worth?
About $520.
Good. Okay. And how much do you have in retirement?
401k about $150. Mm-hmm. IRA and Roth at about $100.
Okay. How old are you?
35.
Okay, good.
Oh, wow.
What do you make a year?
No, wait, let's do that.
Household income is $140.
Oh, great. Yeah, you're in great shape. You're doing great, man.
All right, yeah.
Well, here's what we teach, and then more importantly, why we teach.
Come on.
Okay, what we teach is a thing called the baby step.
Oh, that was weird. All right. So yeah, the guy's doing really well. He's 35, making $140,000 a year. He's got quite a bit saved.
So
yeah.
Let's see if I feel like the caller was not as easy to hear. His voice was kind of quiet. So he has 90 grand he can do something with, right?
In savings, yeah.
In savings, and he owes 180 on the mortgage.
On the house.
Did I hear that?
Yeah, on a $520,000 home.
Okay. Wow, he's doing great.
Well, he's making $140,000 a year. And we don't even know. Yes. We don't even know if he's married and what his spouse makes or any of that stuff. So.
And I didn't catch him saying anything else about other debt or whatever. It sounds like it's just the home situation.
It looks like it's probably just the home. If you're making that much money, it's probably just the home, unless you're really being careless with spending.
I was going to say there are a lot of people that are that make a lot of money and have a lot of debts all over the place because they're not paying that much attention. So
yeah,
you know.
But yeah. I mean, of course, Dave's going to say just pay down the house.
Yeah, Dave's going to say just to pay down the house, with the exception he's going to obviously want to make sure that the person isn't disrupting their emergency savings. And I can't help but wonder if Dave will bring up the idea that well, maybe he won't. Anyway, I'll follow that thought through.
Okay.
I'm curious if Dave will want to bring up the idea that once your house is paid for, you wouldn't need as much of an emergency savings because your monthly output need would be lower. But he may or may not bother to bring that up since this isn't enough to literally pay off the home.
Well, I think
but I just wonder, as part of following the psychology of his rationale of his system, if he will want to go there.
Well, I think the thing is too is the guy has quite a bit in retirement savings, and he's got that he could loan against if he had to. And he's, the guy's making probably $10,000 a month after tax. just himself. We don't know if he's married or anything. So I'm sure he doesn't need a huge emergency fund. He's got enough income coming in that he could replace it pretty quick if he wanted to, or at least a significant chunk of it. The question is what is the most intelligent thing to do here? But Dave's going to do this, and Dave's going to justify it. And I think it's interesting because we looked at the first guy who him and his wife together were making around 80 grand, maybe 90, right? And they had kids, and and he had a business and all that stuff, right? But that was gross, is what he was talking about. So they're living on a lot less. This guy's making 140 just by himself. If he's married and his wife's making money, they're probably doing pretty fucking well.
Right.
So it's a different scenario, and and the way he talks to him is different. I think it's interesting, but we can look at that real quick. Let's go ahead and do it. But tell me to pause at any point here because he's going to get into this a little bit.
That's where you're debt free, everything but the house, and have an emergency fund. That's 1, 2, and 3. You've done that. Then we suggested maybe step 4 that you start investing in retirement, 15% of your household income. Are you doing that?
I am, yeah.
So you got $25,000 going into retirement accounts a year, $2,000 a month.
Yeah, but 10% in my 401k, and then about another 10% just goes into savings.
Okay, but it's not going into retirement.
Well, yeah, 10% is going into the 401k.
Okay. So we suggest, I'm just trying to clarify where you were on what we teach, and then I'll go back up to one. Okay, so 15%.
All right, pause real quick. So.
Yeah, he's going to specify that the money that's the 10% that's being diverted to a regular savings is not the same as saving for retirement, because he's going to want the guy to loop back around to his workplace retirement accounts or IRAs or some such business.
Sure, and he should max out his retirement accounts if he can. I mean, I don't have a problem. My problem is this. So I did a video, and you guys should check it out, on behavioral finance. And one of the big things that's a huge mistake that everybody makes is called mental accounting. And Dave does this all the time. The problem with mental accounting is $1 in this account is equal in value to $1 in this account. $1 in my retirement is equal to $1 in my savings, right? And in fact, if he's put,
but that's not true.
No, it is true. The difference is how it's taxed at the end. The $1 in his savings is going to be taxed less because he's already paid tax on that money, versus all the money in his retirement account, if it's traditional, is all ordinary income when it comes out.
Right.
Right? Even the growth. So.
But to a degree, though, that makes those dollars, in some respects, unequal because of
when you take them out. But the point is it's the idea is, what is the value of it overall? And Dave's got it backwards, because if I put money in a savings account, I've already paid tax on that money. When I withdraw that money, right, I only owe the long-term capital gains on the growth. I don't owe anything on the money I put in. I've already paid tax on it. It's the way, it's similar to how a Roth works. Now, he could be investing that money in a Roth or an IRA or something if he can qualify. I don't know. He might make too much money with his wife if he's married. I don't know what their situation is. But there are other things we can do here. But the bottom line is whether he's putting it into a retirement account or another account, the only difference is the tax. But the money in and of itself is the same going in. The idea that you're giving more weight to, well, it's in the retirement account versus a savings account, really depends on what's the goal and what's the tax. But in and of itself, all things being equal, $100 here and $100 here are still $100. They're the same.
Well,
money is fungible.
I definitely agree with the idea of taking whatever this individual's goals are into account with regards to that money. Depending on what those are, I do like the idea of him choosing something, and maybe to simplify, maybe he really wasn't being clear with us really where he's saving this money. But if it's just going into just a regular standard savings account, I would like to see him doing better than that. And if he's going to be doing better than that in investing, I would love to see some of that get some advantageous tax treatment by going into some sort of an IRA or a Roth if he can qualify. We don't know what his tax status is. So we don't know much about that.
Well, it would be advantageous because he already paid ordinary income tax on the money, right? And then the growth would just be long-term capital gains that he'd pay when he pulls the money out, right? But he'd already paid the money on the principal. Okay? The other beauty of it is if it's in a private investment account or a private IRA even or anything like that, unlike a 401k where you have whatever 20 or 30 options and that's all you get, and they're usually very expensive mutual funds. They're usually 1% to 2%. I've seen some that are like 2.5% or 2.7% fees. Instead, you can invest that into actually better funds that lower fees, and you can diversify it more. You have more options. You can create a better portfolio in a private investment account, just an investor account, right? A brokerage account, than you can in a 401k. Because in a 401k, when clients come in with a 401k, you have 20 options. That's it. That's all I have to build a portfolio. If you come to me and say, well, build a portfolio in an investor account, it's like, fuck, I have millions of options. Right? And the tax advantages are different depending on what the situation is. But on an investor account, yeah, you just pay long-term capital gains on the growth because you've already paid ordinary income of the money you put in. Right? As where with a 401k, if it's traditional 401k, right? Every dollar you take out of that, the growth and the money you put in, all ordinary income tax. So depending on your tax situation at any given time, it could be higher. My point is that it's the money in and of itself is fungible, and you can't put more weight to one to the other without knowing more of the details. Because the only way you put weight to it is by what's going to yield the most money. But if they're both yielding the equal amount of money, who gives a shit what the account is or what the name of the account? If it's retirement or if you name it, Duncan's fund money, it doesn't matter what the name of the account is. It's still equal amount of money. But that's what Dave's not getting is it has to be retirement. It has to be put into that category. And that makes it different money somehow when it's not. I'm just saying he's just being dogmatic about something that should be really simple.
Well, maybe he will, but he has not yet really explained why he is having this leaning toward it being earmarked in this way. If he paused to talk a little bit about the tax benefits,
he's not going to
either or Roth or whatever, then he could make that make sense. But otherwise, he just seems to arbitrarily be valuing something differently without offering any explanation as to why he might value something differently. Because I am a huge proponent of sticking in one of those retirement accounts, depending on the goal, of course. But that's because of a tax treatment situation more than anything.
Right. He's, like I said, this is what's called mental accounting, behavioral finance. It's when you don't equate things, when you say something is more valuable. This dollar is more valuable because it's in the red jar than the dollar that I put in the blue jar.
Right.
Right. They're not. They're the same. They're both a dollar. But he's not going to get into the tax stuff. I'll tell you that right now. He is going to try to justify it, but it's going to be weird. And so, like I said, yeah, just whenever you feel the need, you just tell me to pause and you can jump in and explain this to me.
Okay.
I'm going into retirement is what we would recommend. And so that would mean you would put 10% in your 401k and 5% more into Roth IRAs and good mutual funds. And in your 401k, you'd be in good mutual funds. That's maybe step 4. 5 is kids' college. Do you have kids?
I do.
And you need to save for the college, right?
Right.
Is there something independent of what we've talked about that's covering that I don't know about?
They do have 529 plans.
How much is in those?
About 75 between the two of them.
And they're how old are kids?
5 and 8.
Okay, so you got a really good start there. Good. So we can kind of check that box and you just keep adding. You've been adding systematically to that, it sounds like, and you keep doing that. 6 is pay off the house early. So above 15% going into retirement and above kids' college, check. we would say throw everything at the house, which is the $90,000 that's in discussion here, unless you don't have an emergency fund. If you don't, we use some of the $90,000 for that and throw the rest at the mortgage. Why would I do that? Okay, and the reason is very simple. As we've studied millionaires over the last 25 years, and we just completed the largest study of millionaires ever done, over 10,000 of them, we find to start with that somewhere in the neighborhood, 79% inherited nothing, and somewhere in the neighborhood.
There it was. You got it? Now it's explanation.
So, okay, well, now I'm pausing because I'm gonna offer, another round of my prediction here. He's going to, as he's talking about this study that they did, he's going to talk about a statistic that they have pulled from it, suggesting that most of these millionaires have paid off their home in somewhere in the 10 to 11 year range, give or take, like around a decade or so, pay off their house. So he's going to utilize that as evidence for becoming wealthy, basically.
Right, as opposed to they paid it off because they had the money. Then they could.
Right, but he's going to cite the time component of it and then loop it back to his strategy of throw everything else at the house because it gets you to the payoff in the 10-year mark, and that's what the millionaires that we studied are doing, etc. So that's.
I don't know if he does that. I don't remember if he does that, but he does go into this. This is the study is basically. He's saying the study basically proves the whole thing, even though the study itself is bullshit, and we know that.
90% inherited not enough to make them millionaires. So 90% of millionaires, in other words, are not millionaires because of inherited money, but because of their habits and what they.
That's also kind of not true. Oh shit! Hang on. Did I just lose that?
Million is 401k and a paid for.
No, fuck me.
Would I do that? 6 is pay off the house early. So above kids' college check, we would say throw everything at the house, which is the $90,000 that's in discussion here, unless you don't have an emergency fund. If you do, don't. Okay, and the reason is very simple.
All right, I'm gonna start there again. Shit, that sucked. Sorry about that, Lace. So we'll go back on that a little bit. But the thing with he does the inheritance thing. We just saw it. We'll see it again here in a sec.
Just state the what may or may not be obvious to the casual listener. You might not have stopped and thought about this when Dave's talking about how 90% of them did not inherit their money. That probably is true. However, let's remember, in order to have inherited money, technically somebody has to have died.
Right.
If you happen to have family members that have a fair amount of money and are giving it to you in a plethora of ways that they are living, these are not inherited funds.
Right.
Therefore, you could have started with very many advantages economically through your family and not through your own elbow grease and work. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that if you had that advantage.
No.
But you didn't inherit it because nobody died.
Right. So that's once again, that's one of the big problems with the studies. It's not really a study. It was a bunch of surveys they sent out. Right? So they're self-reported. So if you send a bunch of surveys to a bunch of millionaires, right? And the millionaires that they're talking about are people who are net worth $1 million, which means half the money is probably in their house. And then the rest is, retirement savings that they have through their work. And most of these people were making good livings. We're not talking about somebody who was making $50,000 a year. We're talking about people that were making 80, 90, 100, 140 like this guy, right? We're talking about the top 20% of the country, right? So it all works. It all sounds great and wonderful if we're talking about the top 20% of earners. If we're talking about the bottom 80% of earners in this country, people making less than $70,000 a year, right? Then it's this shit is all it doesn't work, and it's bad financial planning. And even then, even when he does this, yeah, it works for them, but it's not always the smart move. And I'll get into that in a second. But I think that's interesting to go through what he's talking about. But let me do this. So let's look at John real quick in Chicago. So he's got 90,000 in savings, right? He owes 180 on the house. The house he values at about 520,000. And I did this. So the 7-year value in the home grows at 6%. So 6% is what we're tacking everything to right here. The home would be worth about 82,000 over 7 years. Okay? Are we good with that? All right. So let's do Dave's 7-year plan, because he's going to do this in a second. We'll talk about it over 7 years. So you pay the $90,000 to the house, right? So that savings is down to zero. The house payment.
I have to pay the full 90,000. Is this 90,000 above his emergency fund? Like, does that really drop him to zero? Because that wouldn't be part of.
Well, he doesn't really specify, so I'm just guesstimating. Okay, I'm just going with what's available to me. All right. Plus the guy's got enough in retirement. He makes enough money that I don't know what the situation. My estimate on a 30-year house payment for, I guessed, $520,000 house at the rate the guy said he had. The house payment would be about $27,394 a year, right? So whatever, it's $2,300 a month, whatever that is. So if he did that and he paid that, he'd have the house paid off in 3.5 years. So he paid 90 down, so he owes 90. He's still paying the normal amount. He'd pay the house off in 3.5 years. And then for 3.5 years, he'd invest the $27,394, right? And I did 6% just to be consistent. He'd have $103,000 at the bottom in his savings for paying the house down in 3.5. So in 7 years from now, he'd have $103,000 and he'd owe nothing on the house. Okay? It's not bad, right? So he'd owe nothing on the house. Equity on the house would be $781,887 would be the total equity, because he'd own it all. It'd all be equity. He'd have $103,000 in savings. So he'd have $885,000, $176,84 net. That would be his net total of just the house and the savings, not including his retirement or anything else. So he'd be in really good shape. He'd be 42, and just the savings in the house would be worth almost $1 million. Plus what's in his retirement, he'd be over $1 million net worth.
Right. We can assume he'd be shocked over $1 million because we haven't added anything in for his retirement here.
Yeah, we haven't added anything else. So yeah, so he'd be in great shape. So really, it doesn't hurt him. Okay, well, let's look at it from if he just did what he's currently doing and nothing else, right? So he doesn't pay anything down on the house. He just owes the $180,000 that he owes. He takes the $90,000, invests it at 6%. Was what I did. Still paying the same house payment, $27,394, right? And he's not adding anything to the investment because he's got to pay the house payment, right? So there's nothing added. It's just $90,000 invested. All right. After 7 years, he'd still owe $13,661 on the house. So that's not that much. He's paid down $180 to $13,000. So you have the house paid off within another year. Less than that, 6 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Equity on the house that he'd own minus the $13,000 would be $768,226, but he'd have $135,000 in savings from the investment. So he'd have a net worth of $903,000, right? Over Dave's $885,000. So he'd be up $18,000. Right? So it's kind of one of those where it's like, it's either way you want to do it, man. At this point, I don't think it's a huge risk for him to put the $90,000 down on the house. He makes a ton of money. He's got money in retirement he could loan against if he had to. If worse came to worse, wouldn't be a huge deal. He could pay it back probably pretty easily.
Ironically, I feel like we keep saying the same thing over and over, that so much of this boils down to what your actual goal and
what you want.
desire is. Because these two plans, I mean, in terms of the net total at the end, you definitely get the higher dollar amount, so I would put this in the win column for you. But to be honest, he looks good in both of these scenarios. Like these both work out well for him.
Right, but the difference between him and the first scenario is he makes a lot of money, so he can absorb a lot more risk. That's the fucking main difference. All right? If I am doing Dave's plan and I'm talking to a guy who makes over $100,000 a year, Dave's plan isn't the smartest plan, but it doesn't put them in like any untoward risk necessarily. If I'm talking to a guy who makes a lot less than that, who makes $70,000 or less, Dave's plan not only is not the best plan, it puts them in a fuck ton of risk. That's the difference. But he never ever specifies that. It's always, well, if you want to be a millionaire, do what I tell you. That's my point. It's not subtle even, really. If I'm talking to guy A who only makes $60,000 a year, and I'm talking to guy B who makes $150,000, we have very different conversations.
Right.
I don't tell them the same fucking thing. Because they're not in the same position. Right?
Right.
That's
Their
the point.
ability to absorb risk, to deal with, random things that happen and just aren't the same.
Right. If I'm talking to a guy who's makes all of his money, or a woman doing something that's physical, right? Then we really need to have a talk about, well, what happens if you get injured? Right? As opposed to a guy who makes all his money like kind of like I do, where I mostly just talking to people and sitting at a desk. It's intellectual. I don't have to fucking lift things.
Right.
I don't have to be on my feet all day. It's a whole different discussion. If I have a disability, it's like, okay, well, I can do most of my work remote or from home. It's not a big damage. But if I'm the kind of guy who works in construction, or I work in retail, and I've got to be physically there and on my feet, different conversation. That's my point, is it's the same answer. Doesn't matter who we're talking to for Dave. And his justification is, well, we did a study. First off, A isn't a study, it's a survey, and it's self-reported. B, they've never published the data. It's never been peer-reviewed. And C, all these conclusions he's drawing from it are just whatever they want to draw from it.
Duncan, they actually, you can get a PDF of that study.
We've discussed this a couple of times. I've read it.
Okay.
They don't release the data, and it hasn't been reviewed. They just give you their conclusions. They don't give you the data.
Oh, huh.
You can't review the survey answers.
Interesting.
Which is what you do when you don't want.
Right. They only give you the manner in which they have
interpreted it.
Assessed the data rather than the actual data itself.
Yeah. Which is what you do when you don't want people to double check your work. So we'll just finish this up real quick with him, and then we'll go into the Shark Tank thing.
As we've studied millionaires over the last 25 years, and we just completed the largest study of millionaires ever done, over 10,000 of them, we find, to start with, that somewhere in the neighborhood, 79% inherited nothing, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% inherited not enough to make them millionaires. So 90% of millionaires, in other words, are not millionaires because of inherited money, but because of their habits and what they do with their money. And the two primary things...
See, that's, once again, like you pointed out, just because they didn't inherit the money, because somebody didn't die and leave them the money, doesn't mean they weren't given a lot of money. Right? But what he does is he skips that and goes right to my assumption, which is, or his assumption, sorry, which is, Oh, well, it's just because they're just so good with money. It's their habits. They're just so good with money. See, it's all bullshit. It's just whatever they want to read out of it.
We see that those habits that cause them to be successful, meaning hitting $1 million net worth and above, is the primary initial levels of wealth. The first million or 2 million is 401k and a paid-for house. Now, the paid-for house not only is going up in value and stabilizes, but we do not find them saying, I'm going to borrow as much 3.5% money as I can borrow because I can invest it and make a better rate of return. We do not find them doing that. We find
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's about to do this now, but my prediction is he's going to do this weird thing that he likes to do, where he likes to tell people that, well, if that was the case, we would just tell you to go out and take another mortgage, borrow as much money as possible against your home so you can turn around and invest it. He loves to he likes to try to spin the logic that way because he knows people will go, what? No, I wouldn't do that. And then he goes, yeah, that's effectively what you're doing by keeping this debt around.
Wait, let's, that's interesting. I haven't seen that yet. Let's run that scenario. So
we'll slow down, back up with what he says.
Well, let me try to guess real quick. I think I understood what you said, which is, all right, okay. So I have... Well, okay. So, you're the client. You owe $100,000 on the house. You have $100,000 in savings. You say, Duncan, should I pay off the house? Right? And I said, well, you could pay it off or invest it. Right? Dave's argument you're saying is going to be, well, would you take out $100,000 on a house, right? A home equity mortgage to invest. And they're the same thing. That's what he's saying. Oh my God, that's fucking stupid. No, they're not the same thing.
It's what it is it's the way that he spins it to get people mentally to jump on board his protocol, because most people are not logically going to say, let's say I've got that 100,000 in savings and I owe 100,000 on my house, but my house is worth 200,000. I would be like you saying, let's invest your 100,000. Why don't you take a home equity loan out for another 100,000 so we can invest that too, because mathematically that's better. That's essentially what Dave likes to spin to people. That not paying their house is like doing. It's like choosing to take out as much money as possible in the form of a loan in order to invest. Okay. And then he says, well, why wouldn't you do that? And then as people discuss why they wouldn't do that, well, that's really risky, etc. Then he goes, okay, well, that's exactly why you shouldn't want to have your mortgage hanging around your head in the first place.
That's a cheap trick. So the reason you wouldn't take out a home equity loan versus a regular home purchase loan is a home purchase loan is backed by the federal government. There's a lot more security protections behind that. So if you fall behind...
Let's pause. Dave won't say what kind of loan. That's not his point.
No, I know just to be clear. That's my point. He's
going to throw that out there.
There's a difference here, though. That's the difference. Is one is a lot more risk than the other. Right? I have a current home loan on my house. Right? A home equity loan is not necessarily backed by the federal government. They're usually not. And if you can't pay it, then they take your house. Now, a home purchase loan, where you purchase the house originally, you're not taking money off the equity, that is usually backed by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, which is the federal government, which is backed by the federal government, right? So on those things, it's harder for them to take your home if you can't pay it. There's a lot more repayment options. There's a lot more things you can do, and there's more things you can do in like a bankruptcy if that's the situation. So those are a lot less risky. A home equity loan, on the other hand, you're fucking fully on the hook. You go to bankruptcy, they're taking the house. You can't pay the house. You can't pay that off. Something goes wrong, they're taking the house. There's no federal protections to really help you there because it's not federal money backing it. So Totally stupid. Totally, completely two different things.
You haven't heard him do that before?
No, I haven't, but it's the stupidest fucking thing I've. But I can see where if you don't know the difference, you could fall for that trap.
It's kind of some mental trickery, but
Yeah.
I mean it's mental trickery which in some ways is effective, but in other ways doesn't make a lot of sense because behaviorally people just simply are not going to do that. So what you're offering them is you're saying, oh well, but if you like how this other scenario plays out, then you might as well just do this other thing, which is pretty much bonkers. Like that nobody really logically does. I wouldn't say nobody, but virtually nobody would do. Very small amount of people would think that that was actually a good idea, and then use it to spin it toward this is why my choice is the only choice. You know?
Right. Yeah. No, but it's all bullshit. I mean, it's the whole thing with the millionaire study thing. Every conclusion they have is it's whatever they want to make up. It really is. It's whatever. They didn't inherit the money, which means they all did it just because they're so smart and they have great habits. Where did you get that conclusion? Because they didn't inherit the money, it must be because they're all geniuses. And they're all just have really good habits. Right? And 90% of the people in the study don't like eggs. So if you like eggs, you're never going to be a millionaire. It's all bullshit. They're trying to draw lines between dots that don't connect. So just ridiculous stuff. Plus, as we can see with the John Chicago situation, for a guy like that, it doesn't matter that much either way because there's not a big risk factor. But for a guy who makes with Nick in Missouri, who has less money, it is a big risk factor.
Well, I mean, John's scenario, yeah, it's not as much of a risk factor for him, but also the results are relatively similar in both directions. I mean, one gets him out of the mortgage debt a little faster. The other one gets him into a little bit higher of a savings a little faster. Potato. They're pretty similar. Those results.
Yeah, but
so
when you're
kind of what he wants to do.
Yeah, but that's my point is when you're making that kind of money, it's like one bit here, two bits there, whatever you feel more comfortable with. But when you're talking about a situation where no, there's going to be a much higher risk, you can't give the same answer, but he gives the same answer both times. And one puts a guy in a horrible position where it could destroy his life, and the other, it's like, it can go either way. But once again, when you're making a lot of money, a lot of that risk just goes away.
Right.
Right.